while the transgression that causes horror. That's another way of saying the abomination that causes desolation.
This is wrong too, because the people Jesus was talking about was the disciples. The abomination of desolation took place in 70 AD. And they fled Judea, the disciples, and they needed to, because they needed to get away from the whole Hebrew text and the Pharisees, because their divine path was to spread Jesus's word. But so that's hugely important, okay? Because Jesus did say to them, but when you see the abomination of desolation, so he's telling them, not us, because God, this is how good Jesus was. This is how good. That's why it's so important to pay very close, when you're reading his word, close attention to every word. Because there's times he's talking about the future, and then there's times he's talking to them. He's talking to them. He's not saying the future, and it is even referenced here. So, but when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not to be, and then it says in parentheses, this is huge, let him that readeth understand. Then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains. So the disciples saw, oh no, the abomination of desolation is taken. We've got to get out of here, because otherwise that word would have never spread. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees, that whole just the Hebrew, we only acknowledge the Hebrew text crap, would have carried on. So they had to flee. So that all already took place, which is why it's very important in those parentheses where it says, let him that readeth understand. So you and I are reading it, right? Because clearly it's not the disciples. Jesus is telling the disciples when they see it, they need to flee. Why did they need to flee? Because that message that Jesus carried needed to carry on. So get out of there. Okay? Because that's what changed the world. And that's why it says in parentheses, because Jesus knew the Bible is going to carry on for 1,000 years. I need the people thousands of years from now to understand you're not going to see the abomination of desolation, because it happened in 70 AD, and that's why I told the disciples they need to flee. But what has happened, because the whole world's been deceived, is you get, because there's the Abrahamic religions, okay? And this is, so in the Abrahamic religions is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, okay? Which the only thing all three agree on is Abraham from the Old Testament, okay? That's in Jewish, that's in Islam, and since Christians acknowledge the Old Testament, we acknowledge Abraham too. But the problem with this is that when you go back to learning about Revelations from the very Pharisees that just strictly They don't use discernment here. So what this guy does is he says, okay, we have to look at all of Daniel and it'll tell us what to look for. No, that's not what Jesus is saying. Not. This is why he said, let him that read it understand, which he's saying, understand, this isn't going to take place in your time. I'm telling them. Which also then brings me to Revelations, okay? Because Revelations, there's been a few parts of Revelations that I've always had trouble with, and I've prayed about them, just like I don't get why God is going to make an exception for the Jews that ignore the New Testament. Like, I just don't think that God would be like, it's okay for these people to ignore it. No, I don't think it is, but that's on them, okay? So some of this stuff I've prayed about, and I did videos recently about the mark of the beast, right? And so if the whole world is deceived, then the whole world would take the mark of the beast, okay? So the mark of the beast wasn't talking about our time. I think it's the money system that it was talking about in the apostles' time. In order for that word to spread, they couldn't get caught up in the money system and that whole thing. Because what did they all do? They went on to spread the word. They moved about. They moved around. They spread Jesus' word. If they would have gotten hung up, earning coins and in the money system and taxes and all that, then they would be under the mark, really, okay? Because just like we do today, we make time for God. We don't make him we don't put him as the priority. We put money as the priority. So when the book of Revelations, when John was done writing it, it was something that started taking place right away. Okay? But it was very much written for the future. That didn't mean that everything in that book was in the future. I mean, what it meant was that it didn't mean everything was would be in this generation. So the abomination of desolation's already taken place. Okay, 70 AD. Disciples flee. And part of the book of Revelations is don't take the mark. And as I said, that was the apostles. But eventually the whole world ends up being under that beast. And that's why the whole world gets deceived. And the whole world gets so deceived that you have millions of Christians that believe this Jewish eschatology that says the third temple is going to be built, and this is absolutely true. And these people are either deliberately trying to lead people astray, or they don't do discernment. They don't pray to Jesus. I would rather pray to Jesus and know through the Holy Spirit than know from Jewish eschatology. And nothing against the Jews. I'm just saying there was clearly a problem going on, and Jesus was calling it out. And still to this day, hard-headed, they don't. And some of them do, but they don't. Like some of them do follow Jesus's word. I don't know what the percentage is, but I mean, they should be speaking up against this. Like if they truly understand the New Testament. But I just see them being hard-headed, and those hard-headed Jewish eschatology people are still hung up on the rituals, okay? They are. It's the very thing that was the problem with everything. It's why in the Old Testament, it's not that Jesus, do you think that God cared about, it's so important to kill an animal? The only reason he did that was to teach them empathy. But then it wasn't teaching them. They were just like, oh yeah, I sinned, I had an affair, whatever I did, I'm going to go kill the ox and then I'll be all clean. I can go back to sinning again. That's why it upset God, because it's like, forget it. I don't want you just killing the animals. I mean, if you're killing them to eat, it's one thing. But I don't want you just using, like, oh, I can just kill any ox and then go back to being a sinner. It defeats the purpose. Like, this is the things the Jews weren't getting, okay? They weren't getting it. And so by the time Jesus came, this is why he said, you're a brood of vipers. So don't try to understand the book of Revelations from people that came from generations of a brood of vipers. Because there's a ton of Jews that do not want to be humble, do not want to, humble themselves enough to realize, hey, you're wrong about Jesus, and because you won't humble yourself, you have led everybody astray by bringing everybody back to the book of Daniel. Jesus is talking to the disciples. I really shouldn't even say it. It's not like that. When people are truly speaking the truth, and I'm not trying to act like some know-it-all, okay? Really, I'm not. But they're not going to let it get seen. The narrative they want pushed is to have as many Christians as possible looking for the temple. Look to Israel, the temple. We got to. Oh, are they building? Do they have the bricks out there? Are they starting to build the temple? Oh no, where's the abomination? It's like, no, you're being totally led astray. That stuff happened. We've been living under the age where the whole world has been deceived. Whole world's been deceived. All the Christians have been deceived, and they follow this end time prophecy that came from the very Jews that that Jesus called the brood of vipers. Pointless. Yeah, the abomination of desolation was fulfilled after with the Roman destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. This event is referenced in the Gospels, where Jesus warned of its coming as a significant sign of the times. So it already happened. So that's why I'm saying don't follow that path, because it was the divine path too for the disciples, because that's why Jesus was specifically talking to them, not to us, which is why he said, let the reader understand that I'm not talking about your time. I'm talking to them. So, like, Jesus knew there would be people that come along and try to tell you, look for the new temple, the third temple. Do you realize the third temple is not even mentioned in the Bible at all? Any books? Nope.